Chingiwala, everybody. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands, and I'd like to pay my respect to our elders, past, present, and future. Prior to the stories you may have heard today and the performances, we need to acknowledge that there are thousands of other stories that exist on this sacred country, and what a privilege it is to have been welcomed this morning onto country and to be here. My name is Vanessa Turnbull-Roberts, and I'm a proud Bundjalung Widjabul Waibal woman. We are saltwater people. My family come from the mid-north coast of New South Wales. We are strong in our sovereignty. We are strong in where we come from. We practice our sovereignty in how we make decisions every day. More importantly, we practice our sovereignty when we are with our children, because our children are our future. Our children carry the next story. Our children are our kinship. Our children are your children, and your children are our children. At the age of 10 and a half, I was forcibly removed by what many of you may know as the out-of-home care system, foster care, welfare, or if you've done a bit of history, we saw this called as the Aboriginal Protection Board, which often removed First Nations children as a way of reinforcing racially charged policies and conduct. I was removed in the middle of the night whilst with my dad. I remember it just like it was yesterday. My dad, he walked out onto the balcony and I was just about to close my eyes. And he said to me, "Bub, I'm so sorry, but they're coming to take you." Now, can you imagine being a 10-and-a-half-year-old child about to close your eyes? You see, where we come from and who I am, we get strong intuition. We are often told things within here, our stomach. Have you ever had that feeling where you know something's about to happen? Well, that's what I had when I was just 10 and a half, about to close my eyes. Knock, knock. Albie, open up, we're here to take Vanessa. Police officers from the bottom of our housing commission flat all the way to our door. I get emotional because it hasn't ended. I get emotional because it matters. I get emotional because that person you're seeing behind me, I've only ever heard him cry twice. The second was that night. When we talk about family policing here in Australia, which is what we called it in our community, and what I will call it to the day that I'm no longer on this physical earth, we need to understand that family policing is working exactly how it was intended to work. To remove children. And when it comes to First Nations children, what we know is that there is a disproportionate impact of child removal. This idea that the state can be your parent makes absolutely no sense to me. This idea that a minister remains the caretaker of a child makes absolutely no sense to me. In my own story, reasons for my removal fell under neglect. Now, when I think of neglect, I think that there's a physical absence. So how can we respond to that? What we know about many children and young people subject to family policing, that over 50% are removed because of neglect also. So I say, why aren't we meeting that need? Why are we consistently responding as if communities are a deficit? Why are we criminalising poverty? Quite often, people that are diagnosed with mental health conditions have their children removed. Oh, you're inadequate, you're unfit, you're neglecting your child, you can't raise your child. Or you simply might be struggling. Or a teacher might notice you have some dirty clothes and says, "Ooh, you've come to school dirty. I better put a report in." Or what it's known as a risk of significant harm report. It's called ROSH reporting. But bear with me on this story, because I ask you to wonder, do you know where children end up when that report is made? Quite often, if it's a First Nations child or young person, the risk is higher. And quite often, if it's a First Nations child or young person, we know where that child could end up. Children who are subject to family policing often are the subject of hotel rooms because the system can't keep up with their perfectly designed system that's failing us. They end up in residential care facilities, often in places where there may be 5 to 10 other children or young people and their specific needs can't be supported. Or in the most horrific cases, which I've seen in my own work, our children and young people end up in custody. We say, we take you from your family, and then we say, we're putting you in custody, and then we say, hey, we can't represent you. It's a conflict of interest. We stole you, and now you're in jail. That's a serious concern when it comes to children and young people, especially when we know there are better solutions. So, I stand here not as someone to talk about reform, because reform implies that things are working. I stand here as a survivor to say we need to abolish family policing. What does abolition mean, and where did it come from? Well, abolition changes our thinking. It allows us to look at something and say, hey, how can I fix this situation without adding more harm? Abolition came out of the anti-slavery movement, a very strong political movement that was actually advocating against the expansions of prisons. What we know is deeply when we look at our histories, particularly histories that are the subject of colonization. We know that the main goal was to enslave First Nations people. The use of slavery then led to land displacement, then led to child removal, breaking families, and it continues today. What we know is the name might have changed. And I'm going to stick to New South Wales for this example. But it started as I mentioned earlier, the Aboriginal Protection Board moved a bit forward. We then decided to call it DOCS. You say that word around our community and I guarantee we will run the other way because we are terrified. The same fear that my father had when all those police officers rocked up at our housing flat. He was scared that he was going to die, and he was scared about my removal. But it wasn't something new to him, and that's a shame. They called it DOCS and they moved it to Family and Community Services. And then the all-time favorite, a lovely classic, we thought, hey, we already know where children are ending up. Why don't we merge the name together? Why don't we call it the Department of Communities and Justice? So it's expected. Children go from care to what we call the pipeline, subject to the criminal justice system. Now, I've stood here and I've shared lots about the problems, what exists, and I will also share the onus does not lay on my people to fix everything, but what I will share is that my people have always held the solutions. If we take a moment to learn about my people, learn about our kinship, learn about our utopia, you won't lose something. In fact, every single person here in this room will gain something. I believe in abolition because it challenges how we think, it connects our humanity, and allows us to utilize our quality relationships with each other. Because that's what it comes down to. What makes somebody make a report? Because if you had a quality relationship with that person, that student, their family, wouldn't you invest in that and help them? Wouldn't you already know, hey, no, we've got a relationship, and if they're struggling, I can help. So it brings me to what's the solutions? Well, I believe in reimagination, which connects to abolition. I believe in transformation. I believe that together we can do things better. I propose just two, but I encourage you all here today, if you didn't know that the removal of children continues today, I encourage you to do further work, further advocacy, further reflection on your children's school systems, on how they support children potentially at risk, and how we respond. Instead of punitive measures, what about love and support? The two models I propose is a structural change. That means the department doesn't have the final oversight of children and young people, especially Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. What we know is that every time we place funding in one section, whether that funding is committed to a child removal, whether that funding is committed to building a prison and putting a bed in there, what we know is that that bed will be filled and that child will be removed, because there are quotas to be filled, data to be collected, salaries to be paid. So I say, what if we built communities and we liberated communities and we built spaces where if I picked up that something was wrong and I didn't want to wait, which you'll probably wait 3 hours or so to make the report, what if I could go down to that local community centre and say, hey, I've just noticed this is happening. And maybe the community could build wraparound direct support. What if we provided more housing for families? What if, instead of removing a child because a mother or a person has been the subject of family and domestic violence, what if we took the mum and the child together and said, hey, here's a home, here's a bed, you're safe now. You're safe now. I'm a mother myself, and I know if I was the subject of family and domestic violence, and if I was struggling with mental health, I would not want you to take my child. I would want to be supported together with my child. The second thing I propose is what's our responsibility together? What's your responsibility, my responsibility, our responsibility? Well, I say, if you see someone in the community struggling, you're worried a child has not been fed, you're identifying particular potential drug and alcohol problems going on, because I'm not standing here saying no problems exist, because problems do exist, but I'm standing here saying, how do we respond to those problems? Why don't you go and buy some groceries for that family? Instead of over-pathologizing, over-medicalizing, why not say, hey, I know we haven't met, but here's some food. Or maybe not say anything at all and just drop the bag of food. That's another solution. These are two models that allow us to reflect on how we respond. That photo there is my beautiful parents. I ran away at 18 from the family policing system, and I ran to my country, Bunjalung country. A place where there is stability in the land, stability in the trees, and where I could breathe for the first time in a long time. Being on country for me was my liberation that drove me to wanting to study law and social work, because I needed to understand this system. I needed to understand why it worked and how it worked. And then I realized it didn't work at all. At 21, I lost both my parents. I lost my mum to suicide and my dad to the issues of the health system and the inadequateness that happens with the response. In my mum's last breath, she was calling for help, and there was failure to respond. The system, from 0 to 10.5, had every opportunity to support my family. Instead, they took their child. They took me. At 18, I ran back, and from 18 to 21, I was with my parents again. I was with my home. And even they weren't responded to with love in their final breaths. So I say to everybody here, reflect on how you respond to community. Because you all have a place, and this country always holds the answers to love and protection. Protection is with our humanity, and it's with each other. It's not in a system designed to harm each other. Thank you for having me.